How's it going? I think I finally got this thing to work. So I had trouble all day trying to get this set up for some reason, so I apologize. Wanted to touch base one last time. So this is our final time together. Wanted to help you get through ultimately this work. For the few that actually do tune in, just wanted to help you and answer any of those questions that I can get to. So I'm fast forwarding ahead here. Again, this is our last week together. This work will be due on Sunday. If you are one of the 15 that has been doing the work, I will raise your grade, one whole grade, so that you benefit from it. So sorry things kind of worked out this way. It's unfortunate. First time ever for all of us. So hopefully I'll see you next year. In the meantime, I am getting to the spot where I wanted to talk to and help you get through ultimately today. So wanted to talk about supranationalism, wanted to cover that, wanted to help you again answer the two questions. So supranationalism, well, we can talk about terrorism first. Terrorism, obviously bad, right? We know that. Just understand the bigger picture of terrorism is that ultimately you create terror, and this can both be from a standpoint of a nation or a group of people. It can also be a standpoint from political. Take what the communists have done in the past, take what have certain groups have done in the past. You create a political terror by either forcibly removing people from public or at least having that fear of it. You could say there's a fear right now in Russia against running against Putin. Those are very common political terrorist acts. So terrorism is a bigger picture. It's not just the people that happens to kill. So I don't want you to think it's just one thing. So that's the first question. I think it's pretty obvious what the answer will be. Supranationalism gets us into the second question. And again, this is when multiple countries get together and decide on an agreement. Take the old NAFTA agreement that we have here with Mexico and Canada, the North American Free Trade Agreement. By agreeing to do these things, you do lose some of your power as a nation, or as a country, I should say, a state. In the meantime, though, you are actually helping your country or state by making these rules or making these type of friendships, right? You guys have probably all gone through this in your life where you have a friendship that's super nationalist group in a way. You lose some power, right? Your friends say, hey, let's go over here. And you're like, I really don't want to go, but okay. That's part of the supranationalist type of organization. So wanted to take you through some of the ones that you're going to be asked about. So just to kind of help you out. The first one is going to be, if I remember correctly, NATO was the last one. We could talk a little bit about NATO, though, so I'll get into it. So NATO is a political alliance. It was created to counter the Soviet and communist power that was found in Europe after World War II. So ultimately what you had is the Allies getting together, all right, the old British, U.S., France, along with other Western European countries, basically stating that if you attack one, you attack all, Russia. Russia would come back with their own pact called the Warsaw Pact, but ultimately they dominated everybody in that era, so they had no choice, but technically that was their pact that they had. So NATO is a military force in the world. If you listen to the news at all, you'll hear our current president talking about the fact that we spend a lot of money on it compared to the other countries. What it means is it's a universal a military force. In other words, if you're part of NATO, you may find people from Australia, you may find people from the United States, you may find people from France, you may find people from England or Canada, as you can see in these pictures. So you're ultimately, you're combining one major military force, and like I said, it's an all for one, one for all type of organization. The UN, though, the United Nations, and hence notice that the nations is actually incorrect, right? We've talked about this. It should be the United States, but someone already took that. Oh yeah. They had to call themselves the United Nations. Anyways, the United Nations is this charter group. Basically, you have all 193 countries that are a part of this. The goal of the United Nations is ultimately to try to stop any issues that are out there from gaining momentum to the point where we see war. It's a way for basically the whole world to come together and talk. So not everyone's going to agree, but at least it gives a forum for that. You can call countries out if they are causing issues too. So it's a nice way, a cooperative organization, I guess you could call it. Ultimately, again, formed after the World War II. Its goal is to keep the peace. The bottom line is there to keep the peace, and that's its only goal. So we talked about this before. Those UN tractors or tanks, whatever you want to call them, they cannot fire on anyone. They can protect themselves. But if they see any type of fighting, they cannot engage, sadly. That is not their role. They are there to keep the peace. So if they see an attack, they will report the attack. They'll go back to the United Nations and say, this is what we saw. Now what do you want to do about it? And usually the UN's role will be to sanction countries. All right. So this is where you say, okay, well, you were a bad boy. Just like we talked about Russia taking parts of Crimea or taking the part of Ukraine away from them and taking that part of Crimea that was Russian speaking. The rest of the world passed judgment and said that, well, except for Russia's allies, right? The rest of the world said, okay, well, we're not going to trade with you, or we're going to put an extra tax on you for being a bad boy, so to speak. So it can have a major effect on things, but it is by no means a military force. NATO is a military force, and the UN has called upon NATO to get involved before. So it is one of those things where there's two kind of different wings. And again, these are both being representative of the world. So, the good and the bad, I think, is what I put on your notes. If you're part of the UN, the good is you have the ear of 193, so-called friends. That's the good. The bad is that ultimately whatever your friends decide to go with, you're kind of stuck with, right? Or you may not have the majority vote here. Take, for example, the idea of Palestine being a country. It does not have the majority vote in the UN, so therefore Palestine technically does not exist as a state or a country. However, there are many countries who do believe it should be a actual state. So those kinds of things can kind of play out. So same with NATO, the good and the bad. If you're part of NATO, you're part of a strength. You're part of the Western so-called world, which would give you some power, I would say. It would also give you a comfort in knowing that you were going to be defended. However, Ukraine, when it came up, said, hey, we got attacked. What's the rest of the world going to do? The rest of the world went, not so fast. And so, these things kind of play out politically too. So it's worth kind of noting that too. The last thing we'll cover is, well, let me make sure you guys got this, right? So, UN versus NATO. Again, just realize, come back here. NATO is, again, we're talking about ultimately this military alliance, all right? So, NATO's organization ultimately means the North American Treaty. And what this means, or North Atlantic Treaty, sorry. And what this means is ultimately you have a group of countries getting together and forming a military might. The United Nations is all 193 countries, basically, of the world. And again, remember, there's a few that don't get included coming together, and there's no military might. This is just for communication purposes. The last one to get to would be the EU, which is a supranationalist group. Looks like I have the European Union here, and I don't have a picture of it, or do I? Oh, I do. Good. Again, strengths and weaknesses. They're even in my notes if you went through them. The strength being here is that you're ultimately providing easy access to all the countries. They all have the same currency now. They all have the same open borders. Again, you're part of the so-called team, right? And that's a big step, being part of the European Union. You also benefit from the financial standpoint of whatever their strength is. The fallback of Greece, Italy kind of going through some issues. Spain, as you guys know, going through those issues has kind of caused the currency to fall a little bit. Those issues have caused Britain, or Great Britain, to drop out or try to drop out of the EU because they feel like their dollar, their pound, would be stronger without the help of the EU, whereas others like Germany and Sweden and France are like, no, we're staying. You should stay too. So both strength and weaknesses, right? Centripetal force versus centrifugal force, which has kind of been the mainstay of this whole theme of this chapter. So again, the weakness is you're also tied to all 28 of these countries that are in there, right? Financially, you're stuck to whatever happens. When Greece goes through its major issues 10 years ago and still kind of going through them today, you're stuck with it financially. So that's the good and the bad, and hopefully that's very helpful and it allows you to get your work done quickly. Again, just wanted to say hello and say goodbye for a final time. Can't believe this has happened and we've gotten through it, but we have. Next week I'll be putting in grades. And the way I'm looking at it is if you did your work, you go up a whole grade. I will consider some that have done a few assignments and maybe bump them a few percentage points, but I will not give them all 10 points or all 10 percentage points to bump a whole grade. But I'll definitely take a look, which I'm not allowed to do, but I know a couple of you were kind of on the bubble there, so I promised I would take a look. So again, hopefully this helps get your work done. Don't be a stranger next year. If not, I'll see you out there in the summertime most likely. I'll be coaching football again, assuming we get started here hopefully within the next month or so. So take care. I'll see you guys later. Bye.